again, you saw what was happening at the Capitol, but you still didn't want to use National Guard as a clearing force. Is that correct?
We wanted to use National Guard. I didn't think they were the best available force for what would be a very complex clearance mission that would require a highly trained police force. I recommended law enforcement would be the best force for that mission. But I also recommended that the National Guard, that we would continue to build up their numbers, would be good to be able to set an outer cordon or a perimeter around the Capitol. And that's the mission we ended up doing.
But the mission you wanted to do was to have a security force around the Capitol while the battle was taking place in the Capitol?
We recommended that be a good mission for the DC National Guard with their riot gear.
But in effect, that would make them spectators to the battle for the most part, would it not?
And that would allow them to clear and control the objective and clear the Capitol.
So it was just to act as a perimeter force. And again, I'm far from a military expert, but again, it sounds like they were going to view the main battle from the inside. And a battle by that time, which you would have to acknowledge, was lost. In fact, what you seem to be suggesting is that the force with the most strength would act as perimeter spectators and make sure the people who did all the damage didn't get away. Is that a fair way to characterize what you were proposing at that point?
Congressman, the guardsmen that we had available at the time were unarmed. They were on a traffic control, crowd control mission. That was our concern. We had to get them remissioned, re-equipped, reconfigured. And that's why we were making these recommendations to the Secretary of the Army for how best to utilize a force. And we were trying to build that force up as fast as possibly could.
I think what you said before was that this wasn't a delay, it was a new plan on the fly, correct?
Yes, Congressman.
Is that another way of saying, again, I was in the room where it happened, so I think I can say this. Isn't that another way of saying that you weren't prepared in the first place?
We were not positioned to respond to this crisis because the only force we had committed in the district were unarmed soldiers on traffic control points and crowd control. We had to recall the DC National Guard. We had to reposition those forces, reconfigure and
We're worried about optics. This was the first battle in our nation's capital since 1814. We lost it. You wanted to be spectators and you wanted to direct traffic while hundreds of people were injured and 5 people died. I yield back.
On December 31st, Mayor Bowser requested DC National Guard assistance with the planned protest for January 5th and 6th, correct?
Correct, sir.
And was that request for assistance ultimately approved by the Secretary of Army?
It was, and then approved by the Acting Secretary of Defense as well.
Were restrictions placed on that authority upon the request of Mayor Bowser? And if so, what were those restrictions?
She had requested that they be unarmed and that they not take place in any law enforcement activities.
That's a good point that I don't think has been reported in the press. The National Guard troops on that mission were equipped with visibility vests and lighted wands, correct? Not armed. They were not armed. Is that correct? That's what you said, right?
They were not armed, Congressman.
Because that's what the mayor of Washington requested. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So is it accurate to say that the expected role of the DC National Guard prior to the events of January 6th actually unfolding was simply to assist DC law enforcement with traffic control and crowd management while being unarmed?
That was their mission, Congressman.
Well, I will just go back a couple of questions, and Mr. Quigley, in his last seconds of time, took a shot at you for being on traffic patrol. But what we've just learned today is that was at the direction of the mayor of D.C. She asked you to do traffic control, essentially, and be unarmed at that, correct?
Correct, Congressman.
So what you were actually deployed in doing on January 6th when the calls came in requesting they be redeployed to the Capitol, that was a whole change in plans, and that wasn't what the mayor of Washington, D.C. had asked of the National Guard. So when you got the call to be redeployed, I would imagine that there were a lot of things that had to take place. I would imagine that the National Guard troops would have to leave their positions, which I would assume were scattered all over Washington, D.C., and go back to a central place to get armed and come up with a plan. Would that be correct?
Congressman, and they were also called in from their civilian workplace as well.
So there were civilian workers that weren't even, they were at work, like what the National Guard does. They work private jobs. So the Democrats on this committee, many of whom have criticized you for not being there on time, when actually you were doing what you were asked to do by the mayor of Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
Correct, Congressman.